He sat at the corner table like a man waiting for a ghost. The restaurant on 125th Street was nearly empty. Late afternoon, that quiet hour when Harlem seemed to pause between the grind of the day and the promise of night. Sunlight pressed through the dusty front window, cutting the room into long, pale strips. Plates clinked softly behind the counter. A radio hummed low, barely loud enough to matter. And still, every man in that room felt it. The weight. Bumpy Johnson didn't look angry. That was the first thing that unsettled people. No clenched fists, no restless movement. Just a tall black man in a dark tailored suit, seated perfectly straight, hands folded loosely on the table, eyes fixed on the doorway, like he already knew who was coming through it. For 11 years, the man he was waiting for had believed the past was buried. He had changed his name, changed his address, changed the way he walked, the way he spoke, the way he looked over his shoulder. He had convinced himself that time was a shield, that distance could turn betrayal into a memory instead of a sentence. He was wrong. When the door finally opened, the bell above it rang once, sharp, clean, final. The man froze halfway inside. He saw Bumpy immediately. Everyone did. You didn't miss a presence like that. The room went still in a way that couldn't be explained. Even the radio crackled and died, as if the building itself knew better than to interrupt what was about to happen. The man swallowed. His eyes darted. Exit, counter, street, calculations running fast and desperate. Bumpy didn't move, didn't wave, didn't smile. He only spoke after the door had closed behind the man with a quiet, irreversible click. "Sit down," Bumpy Johnson said, his voice calm, steady, almost polite. "We've got 11 years to talk about." The chair scraped the floor as the man obeyed. Not because he wanted to, but because something older than fear told him there was no other option. Outside, Harlem moved on. Cars passed, people laughed, a city breathed. Inside that restaurant, the past had finally caught up, and everyone there understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this man thought he escaped, Bumpy Johnson never forgot. Long before this moment, before the silence, before the reckoning, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson had already become more than a man. He was an institution. By the time the 1950s settled over Harlem like a heavy coat, Bumpy Johnson's name carried weight in places that never wrote it down. He wasn't loud about his power. Didn't need to be. Respect traveled faster than threats, and Bumpy had spent decades earning his the hard way. Harlem in those years was a contradiction. Music and struggle, elegance and desperation pressed side by side. Jazz spilled out of basement clubs while landlords squeezed families dry upstairs. Politicians made promises downtown while police enforced rules that only seemed to apply north of Central Park. And through it all, Harlem protected its own when it could. Bumpy Johnson understood that balance better than most. He had grown up watching power move quietly, through favors, through debts, through unspoken agreements made in back rooms and broken in alleyways. He learned early that survival wasn't about chaos. It was about control. And above all, memory. Bumpy remembered faces, names, conversations, who showed respect and who didn't. That reputation didn't come from legend alone. It came from consistency. He dressed sharp, spoke carefully, and treated his community with a dignity they rarely received from the outside world. He paid school fees for neighbors' children, covered funeral costs without asking for thanks, settled disputes before they spilled into blood. But there was another side to him, one that never needed to announce itself. If you crossed Bumpy Johnson, if you betrayed him, time did not erase the debt. It only delayed the collection. The man sitting across from him now knew that better than anyone. 11 years earlier, he had been trusted, not with everything, but with enough. Enough to cause damage. Enough to sell information that wasn't his to sell. Enough to believe that once the dust settled, he could disappear into the noise of America and live out his days untouched. And for a while, it worked. Bumpy went to prison. Harlem shifted. The streets whispered new names. New faces rose. The man told himself that history had moved on, that legends aged, faded, softened. But legends like Bumpy Johnson didn't run on calendars. They ran on principle. And principle had a long memory. As Bumpy sat in that restaurant watching the man avoid his eyes, he wasn't thinking about anger, or revenge, or even punishment. He was thinking about balance, about respect lost, and respect that had to be restored. Because in Harlem, power wasn't proven by how loudly you struck. It was proven by whether people believed you would, no matter how long it took. Bumpy leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under his weight. He looked at the man fully now, eyes steady, unreadable. "You look surprised," he said quietly. "That tells me you learned nothing." The man's mouth opened. No words came out. And in that silence, the real story began. The man finally found his voice, though it came out thinner than he remembered. "I didn't think," he began, then stopped himself. There was no safe way to finish that sentence. Not here. Not now. Bumpy Johnson studied him the way a judge studies a defendant, without heat, without mercy, without hurry. 11 years hadn't softened Bumpy's face. If anything, time had sharpened it. The lines around his eyes weren't from age alone. They were carved there by watching men lie, beg, and miscalculate. "Thinking is where most men get in trouble," Bumpy said. "They confuse hope with strategy." The man nodded quickly, desperate to show agreement, as if compliance could rewrite history. His hands trembled slightly on the tabletop. He tried to steady them by interlocking his fingers, but the effort only made the shaking more visible. Around them, the restaurant remained quiet. No one had been told to leave. No threats had been made. And yet not a single person dared interrupt. The cook pretended to clean the same spot on the counter again and again. A waitress paused mid-step, tray balanced on her palm, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Harlem understood moments like this. You didn't stare. You didn't interfere. You let the balance restore itself. Bumpy spoke again, his voice low but carrying. 11 years ago, he said, you sat in my living room, you drank my coffee, you shook my hand. The man swallowed. You knew who I was, Bumpy continued. You knew what loyalty meant in that room. The man nodded. Too quickly. Yes, he said. I did. I swear. Bumpy raised one finger. The man stopped instantly. I didn't ask what you swear, Bumpy said. I asked what you knew. Silence pressed in again, thick and heavy. Bumpy leaned forward slightly now, just enough to shift the air between them. His eyes never left the man's face. You knew that when information leaves that room, Bumpy said, it doesn't come back. The man's lips parted. His breathing had become shallow, uneven. I was scared, he said finally. They came to me. They said if I didn't talk, I'd disappear. I had a family. Everyone has a family, Bumpy said calmly. That's not an explanation. That's a reason men give themselves so they can sleep at night. The words landed without cruelty. That was what made them unbearable. The man's shoulders sagged. He looked smaller now. Older. Not the confident figure he'd once been when he believed proximity to power made him untouchable. Bumpy sat back again, letting the moment stretch. Outside, a car horn blared. Somewhere down the block, laughter broke out. Life continued, indifferent to the reckoning unfolding in a modest Harlem restaurant. But Bumpy Johnson had never been indifferent to betrayal. To understand why, you had to understand the world he came from. Harlem didn't offer second chances freely. Every inch of respect had to be negotiated, sometimes daily. White politicians used Harlem when it suited them, white gangsters exploited it when they could, and law enforcement treated it like occupied territory. In that environment, loyalty wasn't sentimental. It was structural. One broken trust could ripple outward, bringing police pressure, rival interference, innocent people caught in the middle. When someone betrayed Bumpy, they weren't just crossing a man. They were destabilizing an entire ecosystem. That was why Bumpy never reacted impulsively. Rage was easy, control was harder, and far more effective. 11 years earlier, when the information leaked and consequences followed, Bumpy hadn't lashed out. He'd gone silent. Let the streets talk. Let patterns emerge. Let time reveal who benefited and who vanished. The man across from him had vanished. That disappearance had been the loudest confession of all. Bumpy had tracked him quietly. Not with threats or violence, but with patience, old contacts, old favors. Men who remembered debts and women who remembered faces. A trail of employment records, changed names, careful moves always just ahead of consequence. Until today. "You picked this place because you thought it was safe," Bumpy said, glancing briefly around the room. "Neutral, quiet, forgettable." The man nodded weakly. "That's the problem," Bumpy continued. "You mistook quiet for forgotten." Bumpy stood then, slowly, deliberately. Chairs shifted. Someone exhaled sharply near the counter. He adjusted his jacket, smoothing the lapel as if preparing for a meeting rather than a reckoning. "You ran," Bumpy said. "You hid. You told yourself a story where time made you clean." He leaned down slightly, close enough now that only the man could hear the next words. "But time doesn't clean anything," Bumpy said. "It only waits." The man's eyes glistened. His voice cracked. "What do you want?" he whispered. Bumpy straightened. What he wanted wasn't money, or pain, or blood. What he wanted was something far more permanent.